7:05, just shy of 7:06. Happy hump day to you. Brian Thomas here. Welcome to the morning show.
They took our jobs.
And someone who's on the phone that's going to be talking about that, Jeff Birding. Welcome back to the morning show, Jeff. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Same, Brian. Thanks. Good morning to you.
Jeff's a spokesperson for Better Ohio, which is a Yes on Issue 2 group. It's an information disseminating group, I guess you could characterize it as that, Jeff?
Absolutely. Just putting the facts out there for people.
Facts, okay. And I have been making the argument because I have real-life illustrations, Jeff. For example, Camden, New Jersey, which had to fire, I think, 50% of its police department when the unions refused to enter into any form of reform or negotiations about reducing either the level of benefits or having to pay into the retirement. The specifics, immaterial, but the impasse resulted to firing. Now, isn't SB 5 a way of local governments or a mechanism by which local governments can restore some fiscal sanity and not have to lay people off?
Absolutely, yes. And that's why I support it. If you remember, I lost the endorsement of the Democratic Party when I wouldn't join Mayor Mallory in laying off police and fire as a means of balancing the budget. I have a brother who's a Cincinnati firefighter. I want to keep these people on the job serving our communities. But when your labor costs are going up 18% a year, which they are in the city of Cincinnati, and your revenues are flat to down, those costs are not sustainable. Something has to give. And I have to tell you, I disagree with the firefighters union who told the city in 2010, hey, just go raise taxes. I disagree with that. I don't think that in these very difficult times, raising taxes on the middle class is the right thing to do.
And that's what would happen, Jeff. I mean, let's talk about the tax increases. We obviously have a whole host of new ones that the federal government would like to impose on certain people anyway. But this would have been taxes that impact every taxpayer.
Yes, they wanted to raise property taxes in the city. They urged the city to increase income taxes like the city of Columbus did to pay for these union contracts. And I don't think that's the right approach. The firefighters union said, well, if you don't raise taxes, then just lay off the youngest officers. And I disagree with that. The firefighters union testified that if we lay off firefighters, public safety will be endangered. So issue 2, a yes vote on issue 2, is an alternative to laying off and raising taxes, which is if we have less money and we can't sustain 18% annual increases in labor costs.
Right.
What you have to do is try to reduce the labor costs while keeping people on the job. And
you
the
think
way to do that is asking people to pay a little bit more for their health insurance, pay towards their pension. I mean, it's still a generous pension that people in the private sector don't get. They get better health care at a lower cost than people in the private sector get who are paying the bill. It allows people to be evaluated in part based on performance, which is how most people in the private sector get evaluated.
Yeah, and
you think reasonable reforms.
Jeff, in particular, when you talk about laying off and fire department, the youngest, I would imagine in a fire situation, I sort of have it in my mind that the youngest, most capable, are usually more agile, in better physical shape than the older people. So you actually probably want maybe a younger firefighter in there trying to rescue your life.
Well, and the same with police officers. And in many cases, same with teachers. Up in Pickerington, east of Columbus, they just laid off a group of teachers. 5 of 14 teachers of the year were laid off because they didn't have the seniority to be avoided. So there they are, laying off the best teachers, and that's just terrible for the kids.
It is, and look back, and I'm going to ask my listeners to look back as well as I can look back to my education. And remember, frankly, the younger teachers were far more enthusiastic about teaching and passing along and disseminating information than some of the older ones. And this is not an indictment of the elderly at all. But if you have tenure and you have absolute job security brought about by this union contract, well, it tends to statistically show, at least from what I've read, Jeff, you correct me if I'm wrong, that your performance tends to go down.
And what issue 2 would do, Brian, is it would just end the practice where seniority is the only factor
in
determining layoffs. Seniority is still a consideration, but it can't be the only factor. It lets governments make some common sense decisions. When you have teachers of the year, those are the teachers you want to keep on the job. Those aren't the ones you want to lay off just because they're the youngest.
No question about it. I think it's a poor business model, this hand tying. But let me get back to the hand tying, which is the contracts that municipalities and local governments have entered into with unions. I had a caller earlier that wanted to dispel some notion, perhaps, that these contracts were entered into illegally, and that is not the case. These were all negotiated, not necessarily arm's length, because it seems that both sides are on the same side of the table. But
yes, they are. Yes, they are.
These were entered into within the bounds of the law.
That's correct. I mean, the 83 collective bargaining law, which was passed without any Republican votes, I mean, it was a one-sided deal. It really tilted the playing field towards the unions. And what issue 2 works to do is to rebound, to really make it more balanced for the taxpayers. I can tell you from my experience at Cincinnati City Council that the threat of going to binding arbitration, where the arbitration is going to pick one side to be the winner, has allowed the unions to game the system. I'll give you an example.
Please do, because this is one of the bigger myths out there, that issue 2 is going to create more labor disputes by eliminating binding arbitration. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, so the city had a $50 million budget deficit in 2010, and the firefighters union knew that the city was going to ask for no wage increases and pay a little bit more for your benefits. So the firefighters union asked for a 4% wage increase, and then asked for additional health benefits and leave benefits, asked for more. And so they know that what a fact finder is going to do is recommend pretty much split the difference. That's what fact finders do, which would mean a status quo contract, which is what the firefighters really wanted. So that's what happened. And so then the city council has to decide: do we want to go to binding arbitration and risk paying a 4% increase and paying more for wages, or do we want to just settle for the status quo? And an 8-to-1 vote we can't afford to lose, so we better accept the status quo. I was the only one that said go to binding arbitration. But just so you understand where my colleagues were coming from, there are examples all around the state of Ohio where the fact finder or the arbitrator rules against the city with no regard for the city's ability to pay. In Wayne County, up in northern Ohio, they told the city go borrow to pay for this increase to the union.
That's preposterous.
But they did. And so that's why the threat of binding arbitration and the union's ability to game it by asking for these significant increases, knowing that the council or the school district could back down, it's negotiating with a gun to your head.
Well, let me ask you this: what happens in the event, in the more and more likely event that a government can't borrow money to meet the demands of the unions?
That you get these arbitrators that say raise taxes or borrow. I mean, it's just, again, where are the taxpayers? You have some unelected third party who's not even from our community, who doesn't have to deal with the mess, dictating to a community that you have to raise taxes to afford the union contract. And that's just wrong.
Where's the voice of the taxpayer in that discussion? If we're being saddled,
issue 2 will do.
Exactly.
That's what issue 2 will do. Issue 2 lets the final arbitrators to be the taxpayers. If the contract increases taxes, if the contract increases the obligation of the community, there could be public hearings, and ultimately both the union's request and the management request can go on the ballot, and the public can decide if they want to pay more. And look, all of us value our firefighters, all of us value our teachers and police, but we only have so much money to pay them. And we, of course, want to pay them as much as we can afford. We want to give them the best deal that we can afford. But it has to be within the confines of what we can afford.
Well, and that's where every budget starts. Business budgets are that way. Family budgets are that way. And the idea that government budgets don't have to work that way, I think, is an ignorant suggestion, because look where we are. Look at how poorly managed our finances are and how underwater we are.
Well, in 2010, the city paid $93 million to retiring police and fire who had built those sums up over their careers in unused leave time, sick leave, vacation time. $93 million. When they cash it out, they don't cash it out at the rate it was earned. They cash it out at the rate that they're retiring. And that's a quarter of the city's budget.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just that the taxpayers, most of whom are seeing less benefits, who are paying more, who are seeing wage reductions, many job losses, and yet they're paying taxes to go to that kind of excess.
No, I understand. I guess and I can easily defend the idea that we have to pay that out. I don't think SB 5 does anything to eviscerate those rights, does it? Because if I'm on the job and I'm entitled to vacation, right, and I end up working instead of taking vacation, my contract, not here, I'm saying that if I'm a fireman or a policeman, my contract says I can stock up and keep that and get the money that I would have gotten down the road sometime, right?
That's right, but
Okay.
it shows how unbalanced these contracts
I get you.
are.
I guess the point is that maybe, like most businesses, you shouldn't be able to accrue and sock away vacation time, and you should take it on an annual basis. Use up your 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever you get, and relax and enjoy it. And because if you don't use it, you'll lose it.
That's right.
I don't have a problem. I mean, everybody works that way.
Issue 2. I mean, just again, because there's been some suggestions that it's unfair to workers. Under issue 2, government workers with less than 20 years of service can still receive nearly 3 months of paid leave time under issue 2. They can get 11 weeks total of paid vacation, sick days, holidays, personnel days, but their leave payouts at the end cannot exceed 50% of the employee's total sick leave accumulations and cannot be in excess of 1,000 hours. So, and what it does do is it gives governments the ability, and again, that's really, at the end of the day, all issue 2 does. It gives local governments and local school districts the ability to create these contracts that aren't as costly to taxpayers. And at the end of the day, that allows us to keep more firefighters on the job, more teachers on the job, more police on the job, and it allows us to do it without raising taxes.
Well, and of course, it will improve the overall position of Ohio because, I mean, our tax burden, our local, state, and tax burden ranks among the top third in the nation. And if
Correct.
we can do something to lower that, Ohio becomes a far more attractive place for other jobs and businesses to settle. And this is just a fact. Look at the dangling carrots of incentives that we offer one or another business to come to the state of Ohio, not giving those to other businesses, and what other states are try to do to bring businesses out of Ohio into their state. This is the grand marketplace of people going after each other, but ultimately businesses, like all people, look at the tax burden. And when they see Ohio as the top in the nation, it's not a likely place you want to go unless somebody's giving you a special deal.
And at the end of the day, what Ohio needs is more jobs and an improving economic climate. And again, I agree that when you have unions telling us we have to pay higher property taxes, higher income taxes in order to afford these contracts. I just think that that's moving Ohio in the wrong direction. I think Ohio's been suffering in this direction for a long time. The status quo is not good, and issue 2 allows a new approach. And it asks the government employees to pay 15% of their health care, 10% of their pension, allows some merit pay, allows local governments to not negotiate contracts with binding arbitration there to potentially bust your budget at the end by some unelected person. I mean, these are all very reasonable reforms. And at the end of the day, it would put Ohio on a new course to allow us to start to bring more companies here. And
it seems to me to be, and kind of a concluding just observation on my part, you can feel free to disagree with me if you want, but the whole idea of going back, if SB 5 isn't successful and issue 2 is shot down, that we'll have these firings you spoke of earlier, and that the younger officers and union folks would be fired first. Newest gets fired first. That in the idea of unions being, supportive of each other in this sort of notion of a fraternal brotherhood and sisterhood, you'd think that the shared sacrifice idea that they speak of in such glowing terms elsewhere would come through here, and they would be willing to pay a little bit more toward health and pension like the private sector in order to keep their brother and sister employees on the payroll.
It was one of my biggest surprises of my 5 years on city council was to see the firefighters tell us, hey, if you have to lay off those young ones, lay them off, but we want ours. We
That's
want
a
our
shame.
benefits. We don't want to pay more. And I would tell you, if issue 2 passes, and then when there are layoffs, they're not done just based on seniority. Maybe all the firefighters, maybe all the police officers, maybe all the teachers would be willing to sacrifice a little because they know the layoffs might include them. But
Good.
when they sit there knowing that they're not going to include them, that it's just the young ones, they have no incentive. I mean, you would think they would have the service and the brotherhood, as you said, incentive.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the incentive has to be about them. And if they knew that they could be the one laid off, maybe they'd be willing to strike a better deal with the taxpayers who are paying their bills, who are paying their salaries.
And with fewer taxpayers, that would be a great idea. Jeff Bird, and can't thank you enough for the insight. I presume there will be education opportunities as we approach November for people to learn more about SB 5? Is that correct, Jeff?
Yes, it is. And there's a website, betterohio.org, www.betterohio.org, that has all kinds of information on it, including a review of the television ads that you're seeing from the other side that aren't true, myth versus fact. It answers all your questions, betterohio.org.
Jeff, I'll add it to the website, 55krc.com, so everybody can get a hold of it if they can't remember the specific betterohio.org. Again, Jeff, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, Brian.
722, 55KRC. Taught some local stories, but before I dive into it, I got a caller on the line. Ray wants to have a comment about SB 5. Hey, Ray, thanks for calling in. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning, Brian. As usual, great show, great information.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
You know, Brian, as I'm sure you feel the same way as I do, and many of your listeners, SB 5 is the issue 2 is so critical for our state. And the other day I heard a report of a poll that had issue 2 losing by double-digit numbers.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything recently? I'm hoping that the ads we're seeing on TV with the governor and shows like yours are going to turn the tide. Have you heard anything lately about that?
I have not, but as you were asking that question, my executive producer, Joe, said the poll has closed a little bit. In other words, it's gotten tighter, but not by a whole lot. So, yeah, right now, opposition to SB 5 outweighs those in favor. And frankly, as you point out, it really is ultimately a question of education. I mean, these are taxpayer dollars, and this is a mechanism for to bring about some fiscal reform in Ohio while keeping these people employed. And again, I kept going back with Jeff on that, Ray, if you heard the interview.
Right.
If you don't have SB 5 passed, all these union guys, particularly the young ones, are going to get fired.
Yeah, and that just shows, you know, the union members only care about one thing, and that's their own pocketbook. They could care less, give a rat's patootie about anybody else, and you know, it's just incredible. It really is.
And I guess on some level, you know, fundamentally, Ray had been pushed into a corner. If we'd have to admit that, it's human nature to look out for your own best interest. But in this case, looking out for your own best interest ultimately is not looking out for your own best interest. Not only are you going to have fewer people to share the weight of that work because people are going to have to get fired, you're going to have, potentially taxpayer revolt on your hands. You're not going to be held in such high esteem. I mean, there's going to be a whole host of aftermath issues if municipalities, governments aren't given the flexibility that SB 5 provides them. So I appreciate your call, Ray. I do. I'm bothered by the fact that the polling is going the way it is, but there hasn't been enough information out there. And from here to November, this is going to be a constant topic of conversation. And as people become more enlightened and educated on it, I'm hoping that the tide turns and we can support the SB 5 by voting yes on issue 2. It's for the sake of Ohio and for the sake of competitiveness. Thanks, Ray.